Hey, hello, welcome to a premium deck profile for Genesis. This is based around the Fenrir variant of the deck. Honestly, I don't think this is as good as the Regalia build, which I can probably go into a bit later as to why. But if you want to try and mix the Regalia engine with the Fenrir engine and get sort of some of the good parts of Regalia mixed in with, of course, the best of Fenrir, but then again, you can't go full capacity on the best of Fenrir because of space issues. Well, here goes anyway. So to start with, 4 copies of Fenrir. So this guy, he's the important ride of the deck. Now, if you don't ride it, it's going to kind of suck. But his ability is basically when you Soul Blast, you can Counter Blast 1 and Superior Call 1 card among the Soul Blast units. So ideally, well, there's 2 ways you can kind of trigger the Soul Blast, because he's got 2 Soul Blast costs himself, which is that he can Soul Blast and then add a card from your deck equal to the grade of the Soul Blasted unit. And that's obviously one way you can Superior Call cards, but obviously you're doing that in the main phase because it's an axe skill. The other way, which is the more popular way, would be to Soul Blast when you attack with him to gain 10k power, because in doing so, you then get to Superior Call the Soul Blasted card that you paid for the cost, and then that way you're making use of your Force Marker again, or getting additional attacks. But then the other thing is that when you Soul Blast, because you're calling, you can also do it via guarding. So if you use Veratrum or Secret Elsie, you can basically Superior Call a unit during your opponent's turn, which is where this next guy comes in, which is Vanagandr. So when he's called, well, you can either call him during the main phase, and if you call him during the main phase, you just Soul Blast and retire a unit like normal, which is pretty good because you're actually messing up with your opponent's field. So that's kind of nice. But the thing is that in V-era / premium format, since the V-series started, there hasn't actually been as much field committing in the early game, especially when you're high rolling against your opponent, as they used to be back in the G era. So sometimes this card does just find no targets to attack. But either way, if you're not going to use that soul, you're at least saving 1 soul. And then the other skill is that when he attacks, he goes into soul, checks top 3, and then you can basically soul charge 1 of the 3 cards, stack 1 on top, stack 1 on bottom, which can help you with trigger sacking, both during your drive check or also during your damage check, because you can use it after the Vanguard swing. Obviously, if you play a card like Dreaming Dragon, you have to be a bit careful because Dreaming Dragon kind of clashes with this in terms of trying to set up damage triggers for the next turn, because you do shuffle your deck. So just be aware of that. And in fact, there's actually kind of other issues as well, because other end phase skills, like for example cards that require Regalia Vanguard, such as next era Regalia Scald, you won't be able to use it, because if you stride into Regalia and then you take the stride out, you're no longer on a Regalia Vanguard. But then the other thing is that Vanagandr is also just really good with Veratrum, of course, because if you Soul Blast your opponent's turn, you're also able to then not only mess up one of their stand units and replace with another unit, but you're also able to retire another unit as well of your choice. So this is basically the main strength of Fenrir. But obviously this engine also is partly the downfall of Fenrir by trying to mix Regalia, which I'll get into soon. So now the next card is 4 copies of Seer Yggdrasil. So of course, as I said, Regalia engine, and this is the heart and soul of the Regalia engine, because this is what gives your equip gauge units boost, including Norn, and obviously you can search Norn with this card and get the restand off. And if you're striding to a Regalia, then you're able to use that Norn to boost the Regalia Vanguard and get multi-attacks. So she's quite okay for that as well. And then next we have 4 copies of Regisa. So I think this card's kind of important, but there are actually some synergies with the deck as well. So she's good because she soul charges 2 Regalias, which is kind of extra important in a deck where you're playing a mixture of non-Regalia cards. And in doing so, you're at least having a bit more of a chance of meeting the Generation Break 3, but it can still go wrong. So you're kind of you're going to be digging through your deck kind of like a madman, just so you can enable the GB3 of this card, and that's quite risky because it can brick. And that's part of the reason, the downfall of the Fenrir / Regalia deck, is that you're playing multiple engines and they clash with each other in terms of space. So the other thing with this card is that when she's placed on Vanguard, you're able to check the top 5. So you can find stuff like Seer Yggdrasil to set up. You can find Var to countercharge and soul charge. You can even find Vanagandr, which actually is the extra synergy that this deck has, in that by calling Vanagandr early game, you can try to find cards to draw into. So it's like a check top 3 searcher, because what you do is you can go Vanagandr swing, and then check top 3, put the card you want to draw into on top of your deck. So like, for example, if you're not getting Fenrir, the grade 3, which is your main ride, you can just try and check top 3 and hope there's a Fenrir among them, and then you keep the Fenrir on top, and then you just soul charge whatever, and bottom deck another card, maybe a trigger, and then you drive check and you get Fenrir. So obviously, what I'm kind of promoting here is a non-trigger kind of gameplay, because you're really just using your drive checks to draw into cards that you want to get, which is also another downside, because you may notice that your early game won't have as much pressure in this list. So that's also one of the kind of other issues with the deck as well. Of course, part of the reason is not playing cards like Thrid as well. And now we've got, this is kind of important, but for Course of Vatrum, you can take on these out for Secret Elsie as well. Secret Elsie is quite decent because it's a grade 1, so you can always just Soul Blast grade 1 and search for it, and it's also a free card rather than requiring Counterblast. But basically, this is important as an enabler. When you ride Fenrir, ideally you just try and search this out, or Vanagandr if you've already got this in hand. Just try and get the 2-card combo together, which happens quite often. It's just that riding Fenrir, I think, is somewhat more of the hurdle, and that's kind of like why some of the card choices are as they are in this list, because I'm sort of trying to balance out so many things that go wrong, which is obviously meeting the conditions of this card, meeting the conditions of Fenrir, riding Fenrir. There's just a whole bunch, really. And then next we've got 4 Regalia Fate Norn, so you can enable your restand, of course. And obviously if you ride this, you just draw 1, but honestly, Counterblast is quite valuable, so it's not the most... I don't really feel that enthusiastic about using it. Now, this card's kind of strange because I've decided to go with 2 copies rather than 4. The reason why is because of bricking. So, as you may have noticed, one of the downfalls of this deck is that it plays way too many grade 3s. And that's an issue because, obviously, if you go against someone who high rolls you and plays an aggressive deck, let's just put in Bermuda Highland as an example, right? Pearl Sister combo, Reindeer, and, you know, Lora, for example, any of this stuff, right? And obviously that's what I used to kind of test when coming up with this list. So this list is kind of okay against Highlander. Basically what I decided in the end was that while this is kind of one of the best things about Fenrir, we kind of had to compromise, because if you don't ride Fenrir, this card is really just dead. But at the same time, this card's also just really good because you're obviously able to restand a unit, and there are some people playing Mega Colony these days, so that's also another thing. Like, I lost a few games against Mega Colony when I tried this deck out against a few players, and part of the problem was I just couldn't meet the conditions, and obviously noisy tournament environment didn't help either. But in a matchup like Mega Colony, you have to focus quite a lot, and if you're not well focused in that matchup, you can kind of play yourself into a corner. So just be careful of that. But obviously this card kind of takes away the need for concentration, so it's nice if you soul charge it, but obviously with 2 copies you're not always going to get it. So, and the other issue as well is that this deck lacks ways of soul charging from hand, this list. So that's another problem as well, and you can't use G Guardians because G Guardians get negated by Gridora, because Gridora is basically a floodgate card that stops your opponent from calling other than from hand. So this deck is actually still kind of vulnerable to Gridora in theory because of this reason as well. I just didn't have space to run Applewitch Cider or something. I think if you can run, I mean, you could potentially look into running something that soul charge from hand, maybe. But I feel like then you're just playing through a lot of hoops because you still have to meet the condition of actually drawing this as well on top of that. And obviously you can't just tech searches. You have to kind of make it part of your main strategy. But there is another list that is better for it if you're willing to forsake the Regalia engine. So everything is basically trade-off with Fenrir if you want to make use of all these different things. Next we have 4 copies of Astraea. So Astraea is, well, I wasn't going to play this at first, but then with all the bricking that took place with too many grade 3s in hand, I decided that this card might be important. Sort of reminds me of the Worlds list that I played back in the last BCS World Championships. I played basically a Uranus E1 Agahime deck, and this card was basically the main card of the deck because you use this Soul Blast Taro and get some extra attacks. Obviously, though, the grade 3 common, Kroot, was important because you Soul Charge 6 with it, and Amaruda for the Soul Charge 5. So this was quite important, of course. And the thing is, the other reason why this card was actually good was because if you ride or call it, you're basically just able to filter. So you find another card that you need more, or if you have too many grade 3s, which I played a heavy amount of grade 3s in that list, of course you can put the grade 3 from your hand on the bottom of your deck as well. So that's also helpful. And on top of that, in fact, I think I played like maybe 11 grade 3s at the time. So yeah, I think I remember upping it to 4 Kroots when Marduk came out, because Marduk basically required 6 soul. so crit became important. Obviously, we didn't have Fenrir yet, so Fenrir's searching ability wasn't quite there. And obviously, though, if you use Fenrir, you're missing out on the Uranus on ride gain 2 markers, which was kind of good because you get 2 force markers, force 2s even. But then you can also search for Uranus with Fenrir as well. There's all kinds of complications anyway. But Fenrir was kind of ultimately good because of the hand trap combo, which I think was very valued anyway, especially with Secret Elsie being searchable. So we have 4 Straya. This card also soul charges 2, which is pretty decent. Hopefully you soul charge regardless, but you may just soul charge triggers plus Varatrum or Fenrir or something. And unfortunately there's no Glype in this list either, again due to space. So I'm not even convinced that Regalia is the better version of Fenrir. I think there are better versions of Fenrir than this list, but this is if you want to go for the more aggressive version, but then has its own kind of self issues. Then 4 copies of VAR. So this is another reason for playing the Regalia engine, in that one of Fenrir's weaknesses is countercharging, and obviously if you're playing Regalia strides, or if you ride grade 2 Regalias, then you can use this to have the gauge and countercharge back, hopefully. That's the idea anyway, but obviously countercharging is very nice, and it's another Regalia name as well, and we do want as many Regalias as possible. Then Overtrigger, because this one doesn't really lead you to deck out like the other one does. 3 copies of Stride Fodder, so you could potentially, if you wanted to, you could potentially put this to 4 and add 1 extra Sentinel into your trigger lineup. Sorry, not Sentinel. You can add like Jimmy Dragon, for example, if you wanted to, and maybe you can take out 1 of the Sentinels from here, potentially, if you wanted to do that, to play. You can basically play Secret Elsie in your main deck, which is also counts as Sentinel. You can potentially put this up to 4, take out 1 of the Sentinel crits, for example, which I'll get to soon. So you can sort of alter the ratios a bit around here and there. You can play Dreaming Dragon, you can play 1 less Sentinel trigger, but then play the Secret Elsie in your main deck. You can even play the Blitz Order, but I didn't want to do Blitz Order for similar reasons to why I don't really play Blitz Order actually in the Bermuda Highland deck, which is that it's not really good for space because you're playing way too many bricks in the deck. And having an order on top of that just kind of hurts more. So obviously, if your deck plays low amounts of grade 3s, then that's great. But otherwise, you can't really do it. So the other Fenrir deck list that I have would have space for it because it doesn't run the Regalia engine. But obviously, by playing Regalia engine, I'm playing like a lot of grade 3s. And Vanagandr is obviously another important card as well. So very tricky. You can always just play like variants like the gold to go on build, which is probably a bit more easier on the resources. Next we have 4 Regalia criticals. You want the Regalia name, of course. If you stride, then at least with Minerva as your main stride, because that's ideally what you want to go into. You're at least able to guarantee drawing, because other strides, like for example Jag Ragnar, he flips when he attacks, whereas Minerva flips during the main phase. Same with Amaruda as well, so that enables the condition for this to draw 1 card. You can use this without having a G unit face up in your G zone, but obviously you don't get to draw 1 card. That's the thing you miss out on. If you're desperate and you're lacking Regalias in your soul, before you can do Minerva's Soul Plus 3 G flip, then you just have to waste this and just give 3k but not draw as well. But generally she's pretty decent to play, I'd say. Then there's 4 copies of the Sentinel crits, again due to space. That's why there's 4 here, but as I mentioned, you can always just switch out 1 Varatrum for a Secret Elsie if you wanted to try and add an extra stride assist crit. We do play a lot of grade 3s, so I was kind of hoping that maybe this is good enough to get away with it. 4 heals as well. So another thing this deck is missing out on is the grade 3 searching as well. So another weakness of the Regalia engine list, because you don't have space to play grade 3 searches as well. Although technically you can make space if you're willing to take out Straya for Heavens. That is an option. Australia only goes down into 1 card of the deck, whereas Skull goes through 5. But then you're looking for a very specific card, so, or rather set grades. And with how high the grade 3s are in this deck, it's a bit mixed, but I'm also quite keen on Australia because, as I've mentioned in the Regalia deck profile as well, she's a 7k base, your opponent can't really damage Naya as easily. But it's pretty complicated. There's so many pros and cons all over the place with the different cards you can play. I'm not really convinced that this is the best Fenrir deck list at all. I think if you're going to play this stuff, just play pure Regalia. Then onto the G zone, we play 4 Minervas obviously, because we want the Regalia name. So here we've got this time 2 Jag Dragon, which is different to the other deck profile. The reason why is because I took out the 2 copies of Earth, because we're not going to be on a Regalia Heart as often, since we are playing a lot of non-Regalia Grade 3s. So now you've got the opportunity to play 2 of each of these, or if you wanted to, you can just take out 1 of each of these and play maybe like 2 Vanagandrs, for example. That's also an option. So Jag Dragon is quite good because he can obviously burst Guardians, which is nice as well. But obviously if you're riding Fenrir in this deck, you can't do the Norn restand with it. So it makes it a bit more gimmicky as well. Then we've got 2 copies of Marduk, because he can enable your generation break. But of course this list, you probably wouldn't expect that it's that good at soul charging. There is no, well, it's missing some cards like Kroot, for example, as well. So you've got some kind of tricky ways of soul charging. Vanagandr can get you a bit of soul. You can get like 2 more soul off of Vanagandr, so that's quite decent. But the other issue as well is that he eats a counterblast cost, which counterblast is quite valuable in this deck. So you may find that you don't really want to use him as often. So again, more clashes and kind of breaking up of synergies in some ways. Amaruda can basically draw 2 soul charge 5, give a unit 10k crit. It's kind of decent just to kind of set up engine if you are missing anything really. Then we've got Musepole. Musepole can counter charge, so if your opponent damage denies you, just use this, and then you can use Norn and Yggdrasil to restand as well. She's quite important. Then we've got 2 copies of Ear. Ear is obviously a good soul charger, that's why we play it. 30k shield as well, so there's no Iris in this list because Iris, well, the thing is the conditions for getting the 5k isn't really that far apart from each other. You do miss out on a bit more soul, but I think given the amount of soul charging this deck can do, I think that's a cost worth paying in exchange for freeing up the G-Zone space. However, you can consider taking one of the Marduks out, actually. That is an option as well in doing so. 2 of these, because I think in this format there are decks you definitely want to play 2 of this against, such as Steam Maidens, for example, who have the piano. Obviously that means that you're basically able to now deal with 4 attacks. You have 2 heals in hand, and not have to worry about meeting conditions of the stupid piano card. And then we've got 1 Loria, because she prevents deck out as well, and she's an easy 30k shield without using soul charge. Then again, this deck, I mean, we don't even play Earth in it, so there's less kind of value to this, because one of the things that was quite nice about Earth is that if I go into this G card, Earth could like literally soul charge all the guys in drop zone and just cover the soul for me, while I can use this to prevent deck out. But now that kind of support isn't really like as needed anymore. Then we've got Dismal as well, just to protect Seer Yggdrasil mainly. So that's more or less it with the Fenrir Regalia deck profile. So yeah, I guess let me know how you find it, and if you want to see more deck profiles like these, then subscribe, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.